After the summer in Norfolk with Nicholson, Moore and Hitchens, Hepworth returned to the studio in Hampstead. John Skeeping and Barbara Hepworth separated that year, divorcing a couple of years later in 1933. Hepworth stayed on in the Mall studio in Parkhill Road, Hampstead, and Ben Nicholson began to live and work with Hepworth there from 1932. It was this year that Hepworth joined the 7 and 5 Society, an influential group of artists. During this period, Hepworth carved her first hold sculpture, Pierced Form. On October 3rd, 1934, Hepworth gave birth to triplets. Here they are a few years later in 1937. From left to right, they are Simon, Rachel, and Sarah Hepworth Nicholson. In the mid-1930s, Hepworth's reputation as an artist continued to grow, and she also published written pieces about her work. The photograph is of a piece from 1935 titled 3 Forms and carved from Seravezza marble. This shows Hepworth's move to reduce her sculpture to the most simple shapes and eradicate almost all colour. She said later that she was absorbed in the relationships in space, in size and texture and weight, as well as the tensions between forms. In November 1938, Hepworth married Ben Nicholson, following his divorce from his first wife, Winifred. Just before the outbreak of war, on the 25th of August 1939, Hepworth and Nicholson arrived in St Ives, Cornwall, with their triplets. Initially they stayed with friends, then found a small house, and in these cramped conditions and with little time to work, Hepworth was unable to make any major work until 1943. Instead, though, she made plaster sculptures at night, and she drew, including drawing operations in hospitals in 1947. This piece in wood, Forms in Echelon, was made in 1938, just before their move to Cornwall. In November 1940, bombs damaged the Mall studio in Hampstead and destroyed works left there. In September 1949, Hepworth bought Trowin Studio in St Ives. She lived there permanently from December 1950 until her death, and it is now the Barbara Hepworth Museum and an outpost of the Tate Gallery. Barbara said, "Finding Trowin Studio was a sort of magic. Here was a studio, a yard and garden where I could work in open air and space." This photograph of Hepworth in the garden was taken in 1957. This photograph, taken the following year, in 1958, shows Hepworth in the Trowin studio. The 50s were a significant decade for Hepworth in both her work and her personal life. Her sculptures were shown at the Festival in Britain in 1951, and in 1953 she was a co-founder of the St Ives Festival, along with Tippett and Rainier, the composers. In 1955, Hepworth created the sets and costumes for Tippett's opera The Midsummer Marriage at the Royal Opera House, and she remained good friends with Rainier, who helped her design the garden at Trowin Studio. Meanwhile, her marriage to Ben Nicholson was dissolved in October 1951, and her son, Paul Skeeping, was killed in an RAF plane crash over Thailand in 1953. Hepworth began to work in sheet metal and bronze in 1956, and in 1961 she acquired a former cinema and dance hall, the Palais de Danse, opposite Troen Studios. Here she is, working on the monumental single form in the large space there, a piece commissioned in memory of her friend Dag Hammarskjöld, who had been killed in 1961. Single form was unveiled at the United Nations Secretariat in New York in 1964. Hepworth was made a Dame Commander of the British Empire in 1965, the same year as she was appointed the first female trustee of the Tate Gallery. She was diagnosed with cancer of the tongue this year also, and was treated at Westminster Hospital, London. This photograph of Hepworth outside her studio was taken the previous year. In 1970, Family of Man, a major 9-part bronze, was completed, and Hepworth also published her autobiography, Barbara Hepworth, a pictorial autobiography. On the 20th of May, 1975, Hepworth died in an accidental fire at Troen Studio. She was 72 and had been working right up to her death.